On a sweltering, golden afternoon, the city streets shimmered like liquid heat. The sidewalks buzzed with people rushing from shop to shop, cars honking in distant chaos, and the faint melody of street musicians drifting lazily on the warm breeze. Amid this everyday whirlwind, on Riverside Avenue, a small bakery glimmered as if it had been plucked from another, quieter world. Its windows reflected sunlight like polished glass, and inside, the scent of fresh bread and sugar-dusted pastries spilled into the street, a silent invitation to anyone who walked past. Evelyn paused at the threshold, her hand tightening around the worn strap of her canvas bag. Every fiber of her being urged her to turn around and leave, to vanish back into the anonymous streets where no one would see her. But at her side, her daughter, Mia, tugged lightly at her sleeve, her small, pale fingers cold and trembling. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. She hadn't eaten in over 24 hours. Mia's last meal had been a fragment of stale bread, carefully broken in half and shared. The thought of going home empty-handed was unbearable. Evelyn inhaled slowly and stepped forward, trying to mask the tremor in her legs and the panic rising in her throat. She didn't want anything extravagant. She didn't even want to buy a fresh pastry, though the golden croissants stacked neatly behind the glass whispered temptation. No, all she had come for was something small, something that the bakery would throw away without a thought. A discarded piece of cake, a pastry past its prime, anything. Just enough to give her daughter a moment of sweetness, a flicker of normalcy in a life that had been anything but. The bell above the door jingled softly as she entered. The warmth of the bakery was almost oppressive. The air smelled of butter and sugar and yeast, scents that might have been comforting to others, but for Evelyn they were a bittersweet reminder of what she and Mia were missing. She kept her eyes down, afraid to meet anyone's gaze, afraid that anyone would see the humiliation stitched across her face. Mia, smaller than most girls her age, clung to her mother's sleeve. Her wide eyes darted from display to display, from the trays of golden eclairs to the cakes layered high with whipped cream and strawberries. She didn't ask for anything. She knew the rules of the world far too well for that. Children like Mia learned quickly that some desires were forbidden, some hopes unreachable. All she did was breathe in the sweetness, letting it mingle with her own hunger and dreams. Evelyn stepped closer to the counter, the polished floor slick under her dusty shoes. She could hear the soft chatter of the employees behind the counter, the cash register clicking, the distant hiss of an espresso machine. Every sound made her stomach twist. The familiarity of a routine she couldn't afford contrasted painfully with the emptiness gnawing inside her.
Her lips trembled as she whispered, almost inaudibly, Do you have any expired cake?" The bakery fell silent for a heartbeat that stretched into eternity. The employees exchanged nervous glances. No one spoke. The customers around them went on as if nothing had happened, laughing softly, chatting with one another, oblivious to the quiet storm at the counter. Evelyn's cheeks burned red as the seconds ticked by, her stomach twisting in despair. She could feel Mia's small hand tighten around her own. She wanted to vanish, to retreat into the shadow of the doorway, to escape the shame and humiliation. But hunger has a way of rooting a person in place. The thought of Mia's empty stomach, the memory of her daughter's eyes lighting up for the smallest pleasure, held her there. She forced herself to meet the cashier's gaze, however briefly, and repeated the request in a voice so soft it could have been mistaken for a whisper. "Please, just something old. I don't have money." Her words hung in the air. Time slowed. The pastries glimmered behind the glass as if mocking her. A slice of chocolate cake, rich and moist, called silently. A vanilla sponge, adorned with berries and cream, gleamed in the sunlight. Evelyn swallowed hard. She couldn't imagine asking for something that was fresh. She had no right. Mia tugged at her sleeve again, her eyes dropping to the floor in embarrassment. She wanted a treat, a single piece of cake, a morsel of joy in a life full of struggle. But she also understood the world. The rules were clear. People like them were invisible in places like this. People like them were expected to be grateful for crumbs, for leftovers, for discarded pieces of joy they could never afford. The employees shifted, uncertain. One of them, a young woman with a pencil behind her ear, looked at the manager nervously. He shook his head subtly, a silent reminder of the rules that governed the bakery. Nothing leaves the counter unless it's sold, his expression seemed to say. Evelyn's stomach sank. She opened her mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain why they were there, but no words came. Instead, she lowered her gaze and clutched the worn strap of her bag, feeling the weight of every judgment, every assumption, every failure of society press against her chest. Behind her, Mia leaned against her mother, the small girl's eyes tracking the pastries she could not have. She didn't whimper, didn't plead. She just wished, quietly, desperately, for a single sweet bite, a small taste of normal life. And then, a presence. From the far corner of the bakery, Evelyn felt the subtle shift of someone's gaze. A tall man, impeccably dressed in a gray suit, sat quietly sipping coffee, observing her with eyes that seemed to see more than anyone else in the room. Thomas Gray, one of the wealthiest men in the city, had come to this bakery seeking a moment of peace, an escape from the demands of his empire. Yet today, he had stumbled upon something he hadn't anticipated, a raw, human plea, fragile and unfiltered, that pierced through the layers of his own carefully guarded heart. Evelyn did not notice him. She could not. She was focused entirely on her daughter, and the small glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone here might understand their plight. She repeated her request, softer this time, a trembling murmur. Please, anything. We just need. The silence stretched. Customers shuffled, employees whispered to each other, and Mia's hand slid into her mother's, seeking reassurance. Evelyn swallowed hard, willing herself not to cry, feeling the heat of shame and hunger converge into a tight, suffocating ball inside her chest. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining taking Mia home with a small piece of cake, imagining a smile on her daughter's face that had been absent for months. That hope was almost too painful to hold. Outside, the city carried on, but inside the bakery, a quiet storm raged. The storm of desperation, of dignity on the edge of breaking, of a mother and child waiting for a kindness they did not know if they would receive. Thomas Gray sat at the corner table of the Riverside Avenue Bakery, sipping slowly from a steaming cup of dark roast coffee. The mug was warm in his hands, a small comfort against the cold precision of his life outside these walls. He wore a tailored gray suit, immaculately pressed, shoes polished to a mirror finish, the outward symbols of power and wealth that the world associated with him. Yet none of it mattered here, not in this quiet, sun-dappled bakery. Here, he was just another person, seeking a brief reprieve from a life that demanded more than he often had to give. The aroma of fresh bread and sugar-dusted pastries wrapped around him, mingling with the faint warmth of sunlight filtering through the windows. But even this cozy scene, usually comforting, couldn't mask the unusual tension in the air. His eyes, trained over decades to observe patterns, opportunities, and risks, caught the subtle movements of a woman entering the bakery. She moved cautiously, almost as though she feared the world would shatter her if she made a misstep. She wasn't like the other customers. Her clothes were worn, smudged with dirt from the streets. Her hands, delicate but calloused, clutched a bag with frayed straps. And yet, in her gaze, he saw something familiar. Exhaustion, anxiety,
and a hope so fragile it could have been crushed by a whisper. Beside her was a small girl, no more than 7 or 8, with wide, round eyes that seemed too large for her tiny face. She clung to the woman's sleeve, moving hesitantly, observing the bakery's treasures in silence. Thomas felt a pang in his chest that he couldn't immediately identify. He knew the look of hunger, not the kind that a momentary craving could satisfy, but the deep, gnawing emptiness that seemed to settle into bones and hearts alike. And in that moment, he realized the woman's purpose was not indulgence, it was survival. Thomas's mind wandered briefly to his own life. Years ago, he had lost his younger sister in a car accident. The grief had left a hollow space in his heart, a quiet void that wealth could never fill. He had thrown himself into business, contracts, and acquisitions, trying to fill that emptiness with numbers and power. But the walls he built to protect himself from pain had also separated him from humanity, until now. He watched the woman approach the counter. Her voice, soft and almost hesitant, carried across the room. "Do you have any expired cake?" Thomas felt his chest tighten. He was struck not by the words themselves, but by the courage it took to speak them, by the dignity the woman still tried to maintain despite the raw vulnerability of her request. She lowered her gaze, her cheeks flushed with shame, as if the very act of asking made her unworthy of kindness. He looked down at the girl beside her. She didn't speak, didn't beg, she simply observed, a quiet witness to her mother's plea. There was no expectation in her eyes, only hope and trust. Thomas felt an unexpected lump in his throat. It wasn't pity he felt, that would have been easy, but recognition. Recognition of suffering, of the way life sometimes pushes the most innocent and deserving into shadows. Around them, the bakery continued its rhythm. Employees whispered quietly, unsure how to respond. A young cashier glanced at her manager, who shook his head subtly. No one dared break the rule. Nothing leaves the counter without payment. Evelyn, oblivious to Thomas's observation, lowered her gaze further, preparing to leave empty-handed, preparing to retreat into the streets that would silently remind her of her inability to provide for her child. Thomas's thoughts raced. He could walk away. He could finish his coffee, pay, and leave. That would be easier. But something deep inside, a mixture of grief, empathy, and instinct, made that impossible. He felt the pull of something he hadn't felt in years, the undeniable urge to act, to change a moment of someone's life, no matter how small, simply because he could. He studied the mother-daughter pair in detail. He noted the tremble in the mother's shoulders, the way her fingers clutched the frayed strap of her bag. He saw the hesitation in the child's step, the way she peeked at the pastries but didn't reach for them. Thomas's mind filled with memories of his own lost sister, her laughter, her small, insistent optimism, the way she would find joy in the smallest things. He imagined the little girl here could be her, had fate not dealt different cards. His gaze returned to the counter. The request, so simple and ordinary in the eyes of the world, carried immense weight. Thomas felt a wave of moral clarity that was startling in its intensity. He realized that kindness was not transactional, it was instinctive, and the capacity for it had not left the world. It had just been hidden, waiting for the right moment. He took another sip of his coffee, letting the warmth anchor him, and allowed himself to observe the woman's subtle despair. Evelyn's eyes flicked up momentarily, scanning the bakery for any sign of generosity. Thomas noticed the quiet tension in the employees. He imagined the internal debate they must be having, rules versus empathy. And in that moment, he knew he had to act. But how? He could not announce himself. He could not wave wealth in their faces. That would destroy the delicate dignity that Evelyn still clung to. No, his intervention had to be quiet, unassuming, humane. Thomas's hand rested on the edge of the table, his fingers curling slightly around the ceramic cup. He thought about the years he had spent hiding grief behind contracts and meetings. How ironic it was that a simple request for expired cake could pierce through all of that. This small act of generosity would cost him nothing, yet give Evelyn and Mia something infinitely valuable,
Hope. As he stood, Thomas's movements were deliberate, calm. He did not want to startle anyone. He approached the counter slowly, careful to maintain normalcy. "Pack the freshest cake you have," he said softly to the cashier. "And some sandwiches, pastries, everything you can spare." The room seemed to pause. The employees looked at each other, then at Evelyn, then back at Thomas. His voice was calm, unassuming, authoritative without arrogance. He did not ask for recognition. He did not demand thanks. He simply acted. Evelyn froze, her mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. The cake, pastries, and sandwiches being gathered before her felt surreal. She wanted to ask why, to offer payment, to apologize. But Thomas merely nodded, his eyes kind, reassuring.
"It's okay," he said quietly, almost to himself. Mia's eyes widened. She stepped closer to her mother, her small hand reaching tentatively toward the bounty of food, uncertain whether joy like this could exist for people like them. Evelyn's lips trembled, and a single tear slid down her cheek. She wanted to speak, to express gratitude, but words failed her. She could only nod, accept, and let herself feel the warmth that came from more than just food, the warmth of being seen, acknowledged, and cared for. Thomas retreated to his table after ensuring the food was packaged, blending quietly into the background once more. He did not watch them eat, did not linger for thanks. The act itself was its own reward, a ripple of kindness released into a world that often forgot how to care. From the corner of the bakery, he observed the subtle transformation in Evelyn's posture, shoulders less tense, movements steadier, eyes brighter. He watched Mia's tentative smile blossom as she tasted the first bite of cake. The warmth in her expression mirrored a sunrise, a quiet hope breaking through months of shadow. Thomas felt something shift inside him. He realized that even in a city driven by money, rules, and schedules, small moments of humanity could create lasting impact. The enormity of life's challenges had not left him paralyzed. It had been dormant, waiting for a moment like this to remind him of the power of choice, of empathy, and of courage. And in that pause, amidst the golden light and sweet aroma of pastries, Thomas Gray understood that wealth was not just what you held in your hands. It was what you were willing to give away, quietly, unassumingly, and with respect for the dignity of others. The bakery seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn stood frozen near the counter, her eyes wide as if she were witnessing a miracle she had no right to expect. Her voice had faltered, her request almost swallowed by shame, and now the world around her shifted in a way she hadn't anticipated. The pastries gleamed behind the glass, sunlight bouncing off frosting and fruit, but her gaze could not leave the human kindness unfolding before her. Thomas Gray moved with a calm, deliberate grace toward the counter. He did not make a spectacle of himself. There was no grandeur, no announcement, no waving of his wealth for anyone to see. To the staff, he was simply a man making an order, except his eyes, steady and compassionate, betrayed the magnitude of what he intended. "Pack the freshest cake you have," Thomas said, his voice low but firm. The young cashier blinked, then looked toward her manager, whose eyes were wide in disbelief. A small, silent debate passed between them, rules versus morality, before the manager finally nodded. The employees moved quickly, almost reverently, gathering the best the bakery had to offer. Cakes were carefully boxed, sandwiches wrapped with care, pastries stacked like treasures.
Every motion seemed to carry an unspoken respect for the dignity of the recipients.
Evelyn couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. Her hand hovered near her bag, as if she could steady herself against this surreal kindness. I don't understand," she whispered. Thomas offered her a gentle smile, one that lacked arrogance or superiority. "Because you shouldn't have to beg to care for your child," he said simply. "Take it." Mia's eyes widened to their largest size yet, a glimmer of disbelief and joy shining through her fatigue. She stepped closer to her mother,
then peered cautiously at the spread of food before them. The small vanilla sponge, layered with berries and cream, called to her silently. Her lips parted slightly, a soundless gasp of hope. Evelyn reached out, almost trembling, to accept the cake and the packages of sandwiches, pastries, and small snacks. The weight of the boxes in her hands was heavy, but not because of food. It was the weight of human kindness, of being recognized and cared for in a world that often turned its eyes away. Evelyn's shoulders shook slightly, a mixture of relief and disbelief flooding through her. She could feel her daughter's tiny hand clutching hers from the inside of the bag, gripping as if to anchor her to this miraculous moment. The bakery employees softened visibly. The young cashier, who had been hesitant moments ago, now smiled with a mix of relief and admiration. The manager, who had held the rulebook like a shield, seemed momentarily humbled by the quiet authority of compassion. Every person in the room felt the ripple of Thomas's choice, a subtle yet powerful demonstration that small acts could carry immense meaning. Evelyn finally found her voice, barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Thomas replied. His gaze was steady, warm, and free of judgment. "Just take it." Mia's small fingers reached toward the cake, hesitating, unsure if she was allowed to hope. Her mother's eyes met hers, and Evelyn nodded ever so slightly. The girl's face lit up in a smile so pure it seemed to brighten the bakery itself. She touched the frosting delicately, as if afraid to disrupt the perfection of the moment. Evelyn laughed softly, a sound rusty from disuse but beautiful in its sincerity, and lifted Mia into her arms. Thomas stepped back, blending seamlessly with the background once more. He did not linger for applause, he did not seek gratitude. This was not charity for the sake of recognition. It was a human act performed at exactly the right moment. And yet, in that quiet action, he created an emotional earthquake that no one in the room would forget. Evelyn adjusted the heavy boxes on her lap, taking careful steps toward the exit. Her mind raced with a mixture of disbelief, relief, and gratitude. She wanted to thank Thomas, to offer some acknowledgement, but she realized that words might ruin the delicate perfection of this moment. Instead, she simply allowed herself and Mia to experience it fully.
Every step felt lighter, as though the burden of hunger and shame had been halved in a single gesture. Outside, the afternoon sunlight seemed warmer, kinder, softer. Evelyn guided Mia to a small bench across the street from the bakery. The girl's eyes sparkled as she gently unwrapped the cake, her fingers brushing against the berries and cream as if she were touching a treasure. Evelyn opened one of the sandwich packages, offering Mia a bite. The small girl's laughter, soft and unrestrained, floated across the quiet street. For Evelyn, the moment carried a weight beyond nourishment. It was a restoration of dignity, a validation that they were worthy of care and attention. Months of struggle, of invisible hardship, seemed to ease in the face of this quiet generosity. She could see a flicker of hope in Mia's eyes, a flicker she had thought extinguished long ago. Meanwhile, Thomas Gray stepped back onto the sidewalk, merging into the crowd as though he had never existed in the bakery at all. He allowed himself a small smile, not one of self-congratulation, but one born of quiet satisfaction. He had given nothing he could not afford, yet had restored something far more valuable than money could ever buy: hope, dignity, and a sense of belonging. He thought of his own past, the grief that had hardened his heart over the years, and realized that it had softened again, imperceptibly, in this small, sunlit bakery. He had been reminded that wealth alone did not define a man, his choices did. And in that choice, he had not only changed the lives of Evelyn and Mia, but had reawakened something inside himself that he thought long lost: empathy. Back on the bench, Evelyn and Mia shared the cake together, savoring every bite,
every morsel a testament to survival, to resilience, and to the kindness of a stranger who had seen them, truly seen them, and acted. The bakery, once a place of silent tension and judgment, now felt like a sanctuary, a space where humanity had been quietly, yet profoundly reaffirmed. Evelyn brushed her fingers over her daughter's hair, smiling softly. "We're okay, Mia," she whispered, more to herself than to her daughter. Mia looked up at her mother, frosting smeared lightly on her cheeks, and nodded. "I knew something good would happen," she said softly, her words simple but filled with a clarity that only a child could have. Thomas Gray, walking down the street, carried a quiet contentment with him. No one in the bustling city around him noticed the change he had sparked, but he knew, and in that knowledge, he felt a depth of satisfaction and human connection that no meeting, contract, or acquisition could ever provide. The act itself was small, almost invisible in the grand tapestry of the city. But for Evelyn and Mia, it was monumental. For Thomas, it was transformative. And for everyone in the bakery who had witnessed even a fraction of the event, it was a reminder. Sometimes, the most extraordinary moments of our lives come not from grandeur or spectacle, but from quiet, deliberate acts of empathy, delivered at the perfect time. The afternoon stretched lazily across the city. Sunlight glimmered off windows, painting streets with warmth. Evelyn and Mia lingered on the bench, savoring every morsel, sharing laughter, and allowing themselves a reprieve from the harshness of the world. Thomas disappeared into the crowd, his role complete, his heart lighter than it had been in years.
And in that quiet, unassuming moment, the city, for just a heartbeat, felt a little kinder, a little warmer, a little more human. Outside the bakery, the city moved in its usual rhythm, the hum of cars on Riverside Avenue, the chatter of pedestrians, the occasional bark of a street dog. To most, it was an ordinary afternoon, but for Evelyn and Mia, every sound was now filtered through the warmth of hope. The small bench across the street became their sanctuary. Evelyn carefully placed the boxes of cake, sandwiches, and pastries beside her, ensuring Mia had enough room to savor her first proper treat in weeks. Mia's small hands trembled with excitement as she unwrapped the slice of vanilla sponge layered with cream and fresh berries. She had been taught long ago to expect little, to be cautious, to suppress hope. But in this moment, her eyes sparkled with unrestrained joy. Evelyn nodded, her own lips quivering, holding back tears. She took the first bite herself and felt the warm, sweet flavor ignite a spark she hadn't felt in months. A spark that reminded her of mornings long ago, of laughter-filled kitchens, of fleeting moments of happiness she had nearly forgotten. The act of eating together, of simply enjoying something so ordinary yet unattainable, carried a weight far beyond calories. It was a reclamation of dignity. Evelyn realized that for weeks she had moved through the world expecting nothing, silently accepting neglect and hardship. Today, someone had chosen to see her and her child, to recognize their humanity. That small recognition, a cake, a few sandwiches, the smallest act of kindness, felt like sunlight breaking through months of shadow. Meanwhile, Thomas Gray had disappeared into the bustling streets, blending into the crowd as seamlessly as he had entered the bakery. He walked with a quiet satisfaction, his mind alive with reflection. He realized that wealth, as immense as it was in his life, did not define him, nor did power, prestige, or reputation. What defined him was the choice he had made to act, not to witness, not to hesitate, but to bring warmth to a place it had been absent. He thought about the countless times he had spent hours in meetings, negotiating deals, growing his empire, and yet feeling an emptiness that nothing could fill. How ironic, he mused, that the solution to that emptiness was not in the office, not in contracts or mergers, but in a small bakery on a sunlit street, in the lives of a struggling mother and child. He smiled quietly, letting the realization sink in. That sometimes life's true richness was measured not by what one accumulated, but by what one gave, unnoticed and without fanfare. Back on the bench, Evelyn reflected as well. She thought about the streets she had walked for months, the hungry nights and the whispered apologies, the invisible walls that society had built around people like her. And now, as she watched Mia take another careful bite, she understood something profound. That kindness, even in its simplest form, had the power to change lives. That one small act could break the cycle of despair and plant a seed of hope that might grow beyond imagination. Evelyn looked at Mia, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You deserve this," she whispered. Mia's eyes gleamed with a quiet understanding. She had felt that deprivation acutely, but now, in this shared joy, she recognized the magic of being seen, being valued, being loved, not just by her mother, but by a stranger who had acted when no one else would. Around them, life carried on. A delivery truck rumbled past, a group of students laughed across the street, and the city continued in its usual hurry. Yet in the small bubble of the bench, Evelyn and Mia experienced a stillness, a reprieve, a moment where the world aligned perfectly to remind them that they were not forgotten. Each bite, each shared glance was a reaffirmation of hope, a quiet rebellion against the neglect they had endured. Thomas, unaware of the precise impact he had initiated, continued down Riverside Avenue, allowing himself to be absorbed into the urban crowd. Yet inside, he felt lighter, freer. He reflected on the human capacity for empathy, the power that lay not in influence or wealth, but in the ability to act decisively and with kindness. He wondered how often small gestures were overlooked, unnoticed, lost in the shuffle of a busy world. But today, he had witnessed proof that the ripple of a single act could extend far beyond immediate comprehension. The bakery employees, though returning to their routines, carried their own reflections. They had watched the scene unfold, seen the hesitation give way to action, and recognized the subtle power of human decency. The manager, who had once clutched the rulebook as a shield, now pondered the flexibility of moral choice, the importance of compassion, and the quiet impact of bending rules in moments of genuine need. Evelyn's reflection deepened as the afternoon waned. She considered the fragility of hope, how easily it could be extinguished by neglect, judgment, or circumstance. Yet she also realized that when kindness intervened at the right moment, it could revive the spirit in ways that were almost miraculous. And today, that intervention had come not with grand gestures or public accolades, but with quiet decisiveness and respect for her dignity. Mia, finishing the last crumbs of her cake, leaned against her mother with a serene satisfaction. Evelyn hugged her daughter, feeling a wave of relief and gratitude wash over her. For the first time in months, maybe years, she allowed herself to believe it too. Meanwhile, Thomas paused at a street corner, watching the city hum around him. He realized that in a world where so many prioritized self-interest, profit, and ambition, it was the unnoticed acts of care that carried the deepest impact. And though he would never know the full measure of his intervention, whether it changed their lives long-term or simply brightened an afternoon, he understood something essential: the significance of acting with empathy, of choosing humanity over indifference. Evelyn and Mia slowly stood from the bench, collecting what remaining food to take home. The simple joy of carrying something tangible, nourishment for the body and spirit, felt revolutionary. The world outside remained indifferent, yet inside, a quiet revolution had occurred. A reaffirmation that human connection, empathy, and small acts of generosity could pierce even the densest layers of struggle and despair. Thomas continued his walk through the city, blending into the flow of people. He carried with him a quiet contentment, a gentle pride, and a renewed sense of purpose. He understood that while wealth could buy comfort and power, it was empathy and action that truly defined a life well lived. In that moment, he felt a profound connection to the lives he had touched, even invisibly, and to the broader tapestry of humanity that relied on such small intentional gestures. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across Riverside Avenue. Evelyn and Mia made their way home, their hearts and bellies full, their spirits lifted. Thomas disappeared into the urban flow, his presence a quiet testament to the enduring power of compassion.
And for those few minutes, in a small bakery and on a quiet bench, the world had felt a little brighter, a little kinder, and infinitely more human. The city continued its steady hum, the streets alive with movement, cars, bicycles, chatter, and the occasional distant siren. For most, the afternoon would pass without notice, the ordinary rhythm of urban life uninterrupted. Yet for Evelyn, Mia, and even Thomas Gray, this day marked something profoundly different, a subtle shift in perspective that would ripple across their lives in ways they had yet to fully comprehend. Evelyn and Mia made their way slowly home, the remaining pastries and sandwiches tucked carefully into a bag, their weight a comforting reminder of the kindness they had received. Evelyn's mind churned with gratitude, disbelief, and hope. She thought about the moments that had brought them here, hunger, struggle, and the small acts of human decency that had intervened at just the right time. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across Riverside Avenue. Evelyn and Mia made their way home, their hearts and bellies full, their spirits lifted. Thomas disappeared into the urban flow, his presence a quiet testament to the enduring power of compassion. And for those few minutes, in a small bakery and on a quiet bench, the world had felt a little brighter, a little kinder, and infinitely more human. The city continued its steady hum, the streets alive with movement, cars, bicycles, chatter, and the occasional distant siren. For most, the afternoon would pass without notice, the ordinary rhythm of urban life uninterrupted. Yet for Evelyn, Mia, and even Thomas Gray, this day marked something profoundly different, a subtle shift in perspective that would ripple across their lives in ways they had yet to fully comprehend. Evelyn and Mia made their way slowly home, the remaining pastries and sandwiches tucked carefully into a bag, their weight a comforting reminder of the kindness they had received. Evelyn's mind churned with gratitude, disbelief, and hope. She thought about the moments that had brought them here, hunger, struggle, and the small acts of human decency that had intervened at just the right time.
She felt a deep, almost spiritual awareness that the world, though harsh, was still capable of extraordinary compassion. Mia, her hands sticky from frosting, walked silently beside her mother. Occasionally, she glanced up at Evelyn with wide, trusting eyes. Evelyn smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. Yes, Mia, sometimes even one person can make a difference. The thought lingered in Evelyn's mind. She reflected on the subtle lesson the afternoon had delivered, that human connection, even in its smallest form, held transformative power. She understood now that her journey had never been about indulgence or wealth, but about recognition and dignity. Today, she and Mia had been seen. They had been validated. And that, she realized, could change everything. Across town, Thomas Gray walked quietly through bustling streets, his mind replaying the moments in the bakery over and over. He thought about Evelyn's hesitant words, Mia's small, luminous smile, and the way human dignity had been restored through a simple, intentional act. He understood that the true currency of life was not money, influence, or fame, but empathy, kindness, and the courage to act when it mattered most. Thomas allowed himself a moment of reflection, thinking about the countless ways he had lived his life focused on accumulation rather than impact. He had achieved wealth beyond measure, yet it had not fulfilled him. Today, he realized, it was not what he had earned that mattered, but what he had chosen to give. In that instant, he understood the profound satisfaction that came from selfless action, a quiet, enduring happiness that could not be quantified, only felt. Back at the bakery, the employees resumed their tasks, but a subtle shift lingered in the air. The young cashier, once hesitant and uncertain, now moved with a gentler touch, aware that the small choices she made could impact lives beyond her immediate vision. The manager, having witnessed the scene unfold, reconsidered the rigidity of rules in favor of compassion when circumstances demanded. Even the patrons, some of whom had observed quietly from their tables, left with a renewed sense of humanity, a reminder that kindness, though sometimes invisible, could leave an indelible mark. Evelyn and Mia returned to their small apartment, the boxes of food carefully arranged in the kitchen. Mia unwrapped another slice of cake, savoring each bite with an awe that spoke volumes about the scarcity of such moments in their lives. Evelyn watched, heart swelling, realizing that today had been more than nourishment. It had been a lesson, a reminder, a restoration of hope. She whispered a quiet thank you to the stranger who had acted without expectation, knowing he would likely never see the full impact of his choice. Later that evening, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought of every hardship, every night spent hungry, every glance from passers-by that ignored her existence. She realized that while the world could be indifferent, moments of true empathy could break through despair. The kindness of Thomas Gray, delivered quietly and with respect, had altered their trajectory in ways she could only begin to comprehend. It was not simply a piece of cake or a few sandwiches. It was validation, hope, and a tangible reminder that humanity still had the capacity for care. Thomas, walking home, carried with him a subtle joy that felt almost sacred. He reflected on the ripple effect of his actions, not just the immediate relief of hunger, but the restoration of dignity, the rekindling of hope, the quiet empowerment that Evelyn and Mia now felt. He understood that this was the real impact of generosity. It did not always announce itself, it did not demand recognition, but its consequences could shape lives in profound, lasting ways. Meanwhile, Evelyn tucked Mia into bed, brushing the crumbs from her small hands and smoothing her hair. "Sleep well, my love," she whispered. Mia smiled, eyelids heavy with contentment, murmuring softly, "I know, Mom." Evelyn watched her daughter drift into sleep, a quiet peace settling over both of them. That night, Evelyn sat by the window, gazing out at the city lights. She thought about Thomas Gray, the stranger who had intervened so effortlessly, and felt a deep gratitude, not just for the food, but for the profound reminder that acts of kindness could change lives. She understood now that empathy, courage, and action were gifts beyond measure, gifts that could ripple across time and space, reaching places no one could predict.
For Thomas, the evening brought a different kind of reflection. He considered the broader implications of his choice. How many opportunities for kindness went unrecognized each day? How often did he or others hesitate to act because of rules, pride, or indifference? He resolved, quietly but firmly, to carry the lesson forward, to allow it to guide not just his actions, but his perspective on the world. Evelyn and Mia eventually fell into a peaceful sleep, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. The story of their afternoon lingered like a gentle echo, a reminder that the smallest acts of care could create profound transformations. They had been touched by humanity in its purest form, not through grandeur or spectacle, but through deliberate, compassionate action. In the morning, Evelyn would wake with renewed hope. She would face the day with the knowledge that kindness existed, that human connection mattered, and that even in the most ordinary moments, extraordinary things could happen. She would remember the look in Mia's eyes, the taste of the cake, the warmth of a stranger's quiet generosity, and she would carry it with her as a source of strength, inspiration, and determination to extend the same compassion whenever possible. Thomas Gray, too, would move through the world differently. He would continue his work, his meetings, his life of influence and responsibility, but now with a renewed understanding that true wealth was measured not by what one possessed, but by the lives one touched. He had been reminded that small, intentional acts could shift trajectories, restore hope, and rekindle humanity. And so the story concludes, a quiet, powerful testament to the enduring impact of kindness. A simple question about expired cake became a moment of transformation, illuminating the capacity for empathy, action, and connection that exists in all of us.